Raybert is fabulous and has one of the best scenes ever. Not just the best in Everybody Loves Raymond, the best in any show I've ever seen. So perfectly executed. This is the 10th episode of season 6 of Everybody Loves Raymond. This is directed by Halvorson, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode chronologically and share some thoughts. And it starts off with Ray and Robert having a discussion. It's really nice to see the brothers bonding as they do pretty much throughout the whole episode. And it turns out that Robert got lucky, and this is because he was at a bar. The bartender called him Mr. Barone, and the woman he was with, or the woman nearby, happened to think that he was Ray Barone, and she seemed so excited by this. Robert didn't really correct her, and it turns out she's a fan of Ray Barone, apparently not a big enough fan to recognise that this isn't Ray Barone, but nevertheless. And Robert, as he was telling Ray this, killed off Debra, because obviously how would he explain sleeping with her if he had a wife? And as Ray says, I finally have sex and I'm not even there. And it was a really funny scene and I liked it. And then in the next scene, Ray goes over to Robert's and he meets the woman. This is a woman called Natasha. She's played by Ortiz. And Robert introduces Ray as his brother Robert. So Ray is Robert, Robert is Ray. And Natasha leaves, not expecting anything, of course, why would she? And they realise that both of them are not able to get a girl like her. But together, when they're combining, I guess, Ray's personality and Robert's looks, they are an unstoppable force. And they are, as Robert offers, Raybert. And there we have our character of Raybert. And they go down to do laundry. Ray helps Robert carry some laundry down. And they bump into another woman there. This is a woman called Wendi, played by Gonzales. And this is when I think a bad decision was made. No, correct that. Robert pretending to be Ray was a bad decision. This is when I think Ray made a bad decision because all of a sudden he sees this attractive woman and tells her, hey, look, that guy behind me is my brother Ray Barone. Now Ray is involved in this Raybert character. And that's when I started to wonder, how is Debra going to react to this? Thankfully, my memory is terrible. I'd seen this episode before, of course. I've seen the show before, but a very long time ago. So I couldn't remember what happened next. And as it happens, immediately in the next scene, where at the house, Debra's there, Marie and Frank are there. There's a knock at the door, and it's Natasha looking for Robert. And she has some clothing for the police drive, and they're obviously asking her. Marie's very excited that Robert has this attractive friend, and they're talking about Ray and Robert, and Debra happens to mention that, yeah, Ray's here, putting the kids to bed, to which Natasha responds, understandably, what kids? Although, again, big fan of Ray Barone, doesn't know he has kids. I mean, it's not, I guess she couldn't, I'm not sure how much of a big fan she was, let's put it that way. But nevertheless, he's putting the kids to bed. She says, what kids? And then they ask, how do you know Ray? And she responds, we met at a bar. Uh-oh, that's when the atmosphere shifts. And obviously they push for more information. They say, did you meet him with Robert at a bar? And she said, no, Ray and I are kind of dating. To which Frank responds, and I don't think there's ever been a more perfect moment for Frank to say his wonderful catchphrase, holy crap, because that just sums up everything. And then if that wasn't... At this point, I'd started to lose it. It was just absolutely fantastic. Everything that came out of Natasha's mouth just sucked more and more life out of that room. And then she said to Debra, Ray said you were dead. To her credit, Debra didn't really flinch. Marie, though, was absolutely horrified by this. And at that moment, Ray comes merrily down the stairs. And of course, Natasha thinks that Ray is Robert still. And Frank says, and I think Frank said a very good thing, actually. He said to Ray, if you've got a problem with your woman, you don't go out and get another woman. Now all you've got is 2 problems, which is a pretty valid point. Of course, they all think that Ray has been cheating on Debra with Natasha. And Robert very timely appears in the doorway, and it was just fabulous. And he goes outside with Natasha, and I think they made a really great use of the front of the house. We almost never get to see that angle, get to look into the front room from the front door, and I think they did a great job with that. And then Marie and Frank appear in the window, and they lift up the window, and it was just so smooth and beautifully executed. And Robert says all of the right things about how he didn't correct her because she was really excited and he kept wanting to tell her, but he's never been received the way Ray has been, and he just wanted to see what that would be like as well. And I did feel for him. I still don't agree with what he did, but I still feel for him in that moment. But understandably, Natasha left and Robert goes back inside, and Debra says to him, when will you see what other people see in you? And it's established that this is, as one could imagine, a self-esteem issue. He let Natasha think he was Ray because he doesn't think he can get somebody like Natasha, or anybody for that matter, on his own. And he needs to start thinking that actually he is a catch. And he is. He's tall, dark and handsome. He's got an admirable job. He's fairly pleasant. I don't think there's anything he does that's particularly annoying or anything. Well, maybe touching his food to his face, but as somebody with a lot of annoying habits, I wouldn't be one to judge. So Robert is a catch, and it's just a shame that he doesn't realise that. And, well, Debra tried to rather aggressively make him realise that, which I thought was quite good fun. And then Robert mentions Raybert, because up until this point, it did seem like Ray had not really had any responsibility. He hadn't done anything in this. Nothing was his fault. He was just a victim of Robert's lie. And then Debra learned that Ray was playing along. And honestly, it wasn't as dramatic a scene as I thought it was going to be, but it was that part of the scene at least. But the rest of it was just so beautiful. That discussion with Natasha just was absolutely perfect. And I actually, once I watched that scene, I thought this has to be a top-rated episode. And it is, according to IMDb. When I ordered the episodes by user rating, it is, at the time of recording, the 10th top episode of Everybody Loves Raymond. Because of that scene, I would imagine. I just think it's absolutely exquisite. And then the episode ends with Robert in the laundry room again, and Wendi, who apparently happened to know he was going to be there, came down with her father, because Robert had said, your father is a fan of me, Ray Barone, we can talk sports sometime. And, well, Wendi took him up on that offer and brought her father downstairs. And, yeah, her father is a fan of Ray Barone, unlike Natasha, and recognised immediately that this wasn't Ray Barone, the guy he'd seen in interviews and things. So, yeah, it wasn't a good look for Robert. And just everything about this was fabulous. Really brilliant episode. And I think the great message as well is don't lie. Don't pretend to be somebody else. Just be yourself. I feel like Robert could have charmed Natasha just by being himself. Because, on the one hand, while yes, she was initially interested in him because he was meant to be Ray Barone, she did seem to get on well with him. And she did seem, based purely on what I could read into this, she did seem to care more about him as she got to know him, still believing he was Ray, of course, to the point where she brought clothes for the police clothes drive for Ray's brother Robert. So she seemed like a good person, and that she wouldn't just use him for being Ray Barone. So yeah, some good messages there, but the most perfect, exquisite scene ever. And ultimately, needless to say, Raybert is a pretty perfect episode of Everybody Loves Raymond.